What's going on? There you go. Raptors fans, if you've just joined us, we are one day after the Raptors' 98-83 loss to the Wizards. The sky is falling. Press the panic button. The Raptors will have a terrible season. No, probably not. But I mean, we're going to get into the game, what we thought about it, how the season is going to go. First, if you're joining us for the first time, this is the Box and One Sports Podcast. I'm Ron, joined by Azam and Pramit.
Hello.
Make sure you subscribe to our channel, like our content, watch all of it, comment as much as you can. Helps us with the algorithm. Now that we've got all the administrative stuff out of the way, and hopefully you've already subscribed and liked this video. Pramit, thoughts on the game yesterday? 98-83. It was much worse than that at one point, but they made it at least respectable. Cause for concerns?
I think that if you really look at the roster, look at the fact that they don't have Siakam, so many young players on this team, like holy smokes! Like I don't remember the last time they had a team that was that was this young, like this many like inexperienced players. This is gonna happen. They're gonna have time. Like in the fourth quarter, they sort of figured something out. I think Fred and OG didn't have good offensive games, and that kept them out of it. I think they have a lot of defensive potential, but don't expect Nurse to be running crazy ass schemes with rookies, because you need to have a certain level of experience and IQ to do it. They don't have Gasol, Serge, Kyle anymore to anchor, or Kawhi or Danny Green for that matter, to anchor those defenses. So expect a lot of games that on paper could be winnable where they will lose. Flip side though, I do believe that they're going to be a better team in the second half than the first half. And I do believe they can get in the playoffs. The length and the way the length that they play with, and like the athleticism that they have, will really help on defense. And you saw at times like yesterday, they were just rebound. They did well. They did well rebounding, and last year rebounding was a problem, like as we saw. And they just couldn't convert a lot of shots at the rim. And it's going to happen when they don't have a natural go-to offensive guy. They don't have Siakam, which puts more pressure on OG and Fred. So it's going to be very sloppy and hard to watch at times, especially because we've gotten used to 50-plus win teams pretty much every year since Masai was here, except for the Tampa year. But I still think they could be a mid-40s win team and get into one of the later seeds. And this is supposed to be a transition year. Like, I think it's obvious that they're planning for like the next big trade and developing guys, and eventually planning to rather, they don't have the pick capital, so their plan is always they want to develop guys and make their Delano Bantons and their late first rounders turn into real good NBA players that they can use as trade capital or collateral. I think that's what they are thinking. So long story short, nothing to worry about if you sort of come to expect that this is the kind of year it's going to be. But if you're a casual fan and you just got used to them winning 50 plus and getting in the playoffs, this will be a difficult year for you.
So yeah, you're right. Like a lot of young players, and Azam, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of some of these rookie guys. What would be going through your mind? Like it's your first game, the first time the team's back in Toronto. How much does that play into the lackluster performance when there's so much emotion coming back to the city and playing in front of a packed Scotiabank Arena?
Yeah, I think it's going to play a part, right? I mean, one thing we've learned probably during this time is that crowds do matter. And for young kids coming in, first time, packed house, already lots of emotions, they're making their debut, and then adding on top of it the whole storyline about Toronto being back. I don't know how much that would put pressure on it. So that's one. But I also feel that, I mean, it was a really young team yesterday. If you look at it, like, so lots of new faces, a lot of inexperienced faces. So it's not as if it's like a one rookie, two rookie who's surrounded by loads of veterans, right? That you can probably ease them in. So I don't think it's going to be as bad as it was last night. I'm sure OG is going to be better than, I think, what was it, 3 for 7 from behind, I think 17 or something like that. Or
Yeah, he was at like 18%.
yeah, so I mean, he's going to be better than that for sure. I think Fred's going to be better than that. Barnes, we knew would be a work in progress, so I was kind of impressed with Banton towards the end, so that was nice. Although I think Nurse said that you can't probably play like that every night.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you might want to tuck away those planning those parade routes for the time being. Just hold off on those and tuck away your parade banners, because that's not happening anytime soon.
Yeah, and I think like if you're somebody who's been around, you're going to understand a little bit of, you know, the growing pains that sometimes come with a team that's this young and a lineup that's pretty experimental, especially when you look at the direction that the NBA has mostly gone over the past, like, you know, 5 to 10 years, I guess. They shot just under 31%. That's not going to happen every game. There are going to definitely be a lot of games where this club struggles to hit shots, even open shots. And Pramit, we were talking about it yesterday on our WhatsApp chat. I feel, and I know that there's more to it. You know, I feel that their offense is definitely going to come from their defense. We saw it in the second half. We need to run. We need to run, get open baskets. And you know what? They started to run a lot more in the second half because of the stops. But the only thing that I saw wrong was that, and this has been something that's plagued the team for the past few seasons. It's finishing at the basket that's always been an issue. But even in the half court sets, you see when Fred VanVleet gets into the lane, and he actually acknowledged it in his post game press conference, where he took some bad shots, and like maybe he was forcing it a little bit too much, thinking he had to take on a little bit more. I'm sure that has a lot to do with it, because there's a lot more responsibility on his and OG's shoulders. But I mean, Nurse said some of the lineups looked very, very uncomfortable. You could see it on the court. It's going to take some time while he massages the lineups and tries to figure out who fits well together.
Yeah. And we talk about the youth of the team, but I mean, the veterans didn't play well. Let's call it spade a spade. I mean, as we already talked about, OG and Fred didn't have good games. Dragic didn't really have a good game. There were Boucher, who didn't get into any game in training camp during the preseason, didn't have a good game either. So some of those things will just take care of itself. Some of those issues will normalize, but to your point, they're not going to score in the half court. They're going to have to get a stop and go in transition, because they don't have that natural gifted offensive player who could just they can create offense for themselves. They don't really have that. It's even OG, who's flashing a lot of new moves and ISOing a lot, which I think is by design, because he wanted to get comfortable doing it. This is new he never did it in college, even.
Yeah.
And if there's one, I don't want to sound critical, but if because the Raptors have been phenomenal at drafting under the sides regime, but if there is one criticism, that they've never really drafted a natural offensive player. They've always sort of gone with the toolsy, big-bodied, athletic wings who defend hard and are good two-way players and have developed offensively and are good offensive role players, but they never. Now, part of it is just because they've rarely drafted that high, except this past year. But it's always been a target. Like, they've never drafted a shooter. Like, a lot of teams you find go for shooting in the second round. They never did that. So, which is fine. That's their strategy. And in the past, you kind of got away with it because you had Kyle, you had DeMar. Obviously, Kawhi was there for a year, but the guys that could score, so you never really had to worry about that so much. But it's sort of over the last few years that we've seen, as the rosters started to turn over and as older players, veterans had left, it hasn't left them much behind on the offensive side. They're going to have to win by playing two-way basketball, getting stops, using their size and their length. That's a big team. Like, Scotty Barnes is bigger. Like, he looks bigger than Montrezl Harrell standing next to him, and Montrezl is supposed to be a center. They're big. They're gonna have to depend on that, like their size and their athleticism and their length. Whew. They're huge.
Yeah, and Nurse did say a few times in the preseason during some of the press conferences that it's going to have to be the offense that generates baskets, and it's not going to be any one single player that they're relying on, because you're right.
The defense.
Sorry?
You said the offense. I mean the defense.
No. The offensive structure. So the system is what's going to have to generate the offense. It's not going to be any one player you give the ball to and ISO. It's going to be the offense and relying on the plays and how they're designed. And he talked a little bit about some of the back cuts they got in the second half when they kind of changed the lineup a little bit. So it will come. I don't think there's any cause for concern. But the one thing is, when you look at the schedule over the next few games, you have the Celtics tomorrow. You have the Mavericks, who just got thumped by Atlanta, and Atlanta looks like a great team. That depth is going to be scary. Then you have the Bulls, you have the Pacers, Magic, and Pacers again. So it's not. I mean, it could be an ugly start again. I don't think that aside from maybe Orlando, maybe the Pacers, I don't know that the other games are definite wins. So we might have to be a little bit patient, and while they figure things out. And I'm just a little bit concerned that it's going to end up looking a little bit like the beginning of last year, where we kept saying, they just have to figure out how to work Len in. They have to figure out how to get Baines in there. And it could be an ugly start to the season before they start to figure it out.
They never figured that one out.
No, no. To be fair, they figured it out near the All-Star break. I mean, not with Baines and Len. Using Len was gone. Yeah. Using Bain a little bit less, but they started to figure it out around the All-Star break, and that's when Pascal started to hit his stride. And that's going to be, I think, an important turning point in the season. It's when Pascal comes back and they have that extra option offensively to be able to do something a little bit different. Right now, you look at it and it's very hard to see where that offense is going to come from.
Yeah, and again, I think yesterday was just they missed good, a lot of shots at the rim that they would normally make, which would have, had they done that more so in the first half, that would have changed the trajectory of the game. So it's not as bad as the score indicates. I mean, obviously, I think that they will be a defensive juggernaut team, but it's going to take time to get there. They might not even be till next year if they were to come back with a similar roster, because a lot of defense just comes down to knowing the league and knowing the nuances of people. Like Marc Gasol, for a guy that was immobile, he knew where to stand all the time. He knew where to go, when to get there, and how to get there efficiently. And I think there's a lot of these younger guys like Precious, Scotty, Delano, they're going to have to deal with those growing pains. And Malachi Flynn, if he gets out of Nurse's doghouse.
He's in that Matt Thomas doghouse right now, man.
I wonder what's going on with that. I mean, he hasn't been happy with them. I mean, he played okay in the preseason. He had a pretty good summer league. I mean, Nick Nurse is very purposeful. When guys are in the doghouse. And you would think yesterday, where Malachi has some shooting, that they would want to put him in yesterday when they just couldn't buy a bucket in the first half, and Nurse didn't do it.
So here's a question. Azam, do you think this team is any better if they had decided to retain Lowry? I mean, not decided, but let's say hypothetically Lowry is still on this team. Do they have a realistic shot at the playoffs? Does it matter?
I mean, sure, they would be marginally better, but what are you going to accomplish? You're not going to challenge for a championship. So I don't know. Maybe he might have added, again, in baseball terms, he would have added probably 3-4 wins, but that's about it.
And the only reason that I asked that is because I'm sure people are going to say that, they should have gone out and signed somebody else. I was going to say hired for some reason. They should have gone out and signed somebody else But I mean, to be honest, there was nobody else that they could have signed. And also, I hate the thought of Lowry playing in a Miami Heat jersey. Like I can't bring myself to watch a Heat game yet.
No, no, that's a fair point. But I mean, from a Raptors standpoint, I mean, I don't know. Maybe re-signing Lowry would be more like punting development, like further down another year. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, who's he going to take minutes from? Would it be Malachi? Well, first of all, like, I think we need to also prep what Ron alluded to. He probably wasn't coming back. I mean,
no, yeah. And this is complete hypothetical. And to anybody watching, this is just throwing it out there.
Yeah, like he wasn't going to come back unless he went out in the market and didn't have any takers. Then he may have come back on a 1 year and maybe hope for like a deadline deal if they were out of it, or a 2 year like a 1+ player option type thing. Yeah, he wasn't gonna like. So it's not like they made the decision. That was a mutual decision to walk away. So
yeah,
but if you were on the team, yeah, of course it'd be better. I mean, just having an more so like his shooting, his IQ, the motor, like a lot of the floor would have been higher for sure. But to Azam's point, they wouldn't have had the roster around him. So unless like it's one of those deals where you just want him to retire a Raptor and he's not really concerned about chasing or getting another title in the very short term, it's about just, like securing his Toronto legacy, sure. And I would have loved to have seen it, but I mean, realistically, it's probably best for both sides. So, they would have been, I think if anything, what they could have done had they, think they should have maybe prioritized, and maybe they tried to and they're going to get it done. Finding some shooting, just a guy that can, like a catch and shoot guy who could come in for a few minutes, get you a couple of shots, space the floor a bit. Because I do also believe that you're going to have a lot of and some inconsistent offense here. And I think that you can help with the development of players if they're in closer games and if they have a shot to come back and win, and like making like a 15-point deficit into maybe an 11-point deficit or a 9-point deficit changes things. Just hitting an extra shot here or there to keep you within striking distance. That's one thing I would have, if I were them, I would have tried to see if they could find a shooter for the bench.
Somebody like a Matt Thomas.
Well, no, you have two inches. Somebody a little better than that.
I'm just saying because we had him when we got rid of him. But it's just I actually think there would have been a place. Not that, I mean, I don't know if he gets minutes with Nurse, but I think there would have been a place for him. I think he could have hit some shots. I still love Matt Thomas.
A shooter that, I mean, most like sharpshooters aren't really good defensive players, but a shooter that you'd feel comfortable with getting some extended run where he's not going to kill. I really like. I think that Nurse and Masai, especially, they don't want any defensive holes on the team. Yeah. I really like. They were willing to sacrifice offense not to have a defensive hole, and I don't know if it just comes from the years of some bad matchups in the playoffs under the Casey years, where too many guys got easily switched onto and things like that. But that's how they want to play, and that's the culture they're setting. So.
Yeah, I mean, it still remains to be seen what happens with Decker and if he's able to give us anything. I think that's one of the guys that they envisioned filling that role. Svi as well. Hopefully he can. I don't know what Svi's numbers were like yesterday. Let me take a look. I know he got into foul trouble at one point. 4 points, shot 20%. Like I don't like when you look up and down. There wasn't anybody who even shot. Like Kem was at 50%. Goran was at 42%, but on low shots. Delano was at 75%. But like everybody else, like there are some ugly numbers. 17% from OG, 37 from Precious, 30 from Boucher, like 25 from Fred. It's definitely not going to be that bad. We'll I got to believe somebody's going to start hitting some shots at some point. But I mean, I do like a little bit better how the offense was running with Kem in there instead of Precious. But I mean, I still have high hopes for Precious. I just hope things that I hope that. Okay, so it's not going to be a mid-40s win season. I think I've seen projections. I've seen the Darko projections, which have them at 37 or 39 wins. Vegas, I think, had a mid-30s. I think high 30s to like low 40s is probably what we're going to get, and low 40s is probably being a little bit optimistic. But I mean, the most important thing is going to be the progression and development of some of our guys.
Mm-hmm.
That's got to be the theme for the season.
I think in the East, it remains open. Like, I honestly think that they could get in. Like, there's a lot. I think there are some teams in the East that performed better than what we thought they would be last year, and I think we'll come back down to earth a little bit. Knicks, for example, their playoff performance pretty much showed that when somebody's game planning for them, they got exposed to the like no tomorrow. Obviously, Philly's a good team, but with the whole Simmons situation, they're not going to necessarily rack up wins in the regular season. They probably aren't going to have as good a regular season. But in the playoffs, that situation will be settled and they'll be very dangerous. But they may sacrifice wins, but they're good enough to be able to do so. Even sorry, go ahead.
Let's just stop there for a bit because I think it's an interesting thing to talk about because Raptors Twitter yesterday or the day before with some of the news about Simmons coming out. Raptors Twitter is blowing up with again the thought of Pascal for Simmons, which I think is crazy. Azam, is that a move that you would be willing to even entertain with that kind of player?
No, character is a big thing, especially, I think you mentioned yesterday. I don't know if it was in our chats or Twitter or on Twitter, but I mean, they look a lot for character. I don't think Simmons is going to fit in.
There's a podcast. I think I sent you guys the list. One of the ESPN daily podcasts where Ramona Shelburne is just reports on the whole story and how certain things happened in Philly, just to sort of give the full picture. So while I do believe that Simmons is behaving unprofessionally, it started at first when he came over when Daryl Morey came over and used him tried to get James Harden, and there probably wasn't enough communication. I mean, they did eventually communicate it, but it wasn't necessarily handled that well by Philly as soon as from what Shelburne says. So Daryl Morey has a very, very he clearly favors Embiid. Like, him and Embiid hang out together, they play golf, and Simmons is just ignored. So I do believe, and Simmons at the end of the year, he did ask for a deal, and he didn't. It wasn't one of those, I want you to trade me to LA, or I want you to trade me here. It was, I will go anywhere. I just feel it's best to go move on. So I don't think that he's now what's going on in training camp. Definitely, but I also think at this point, it's a lot of it is just like a ploy, making the situation look bad. Probably his agent telling him to do these things to force Philly's hand. And then Daryl Morey came out today and said, no, this is going to take a long time, basically saying that, no, we're not going to be cornered. So a lot of it is now just posturing. But I don't want to shame the guy's character necessarily, because he did request out in the right way. That said, for a team that doesn't have shooting, like he's afraid to shoot the ball. I don't think he fits. At least in the short term, he doesn't fit in. Like, you need to surround the guy with shooters, and then maybe he could play power forward, and then just sort of be almost like a point center, kind of like how
like a Giannis.
But Giannis can do enough but Giannis is much better, but similar to that, yeah. But we don't have the roster around him. So he is under contract for a while, but you're going to have to really – it's going to take time to get the team around him built, and then he's approaching free agency. So I don't see the fit in that regard. Now, if you were to go to I'm just throwing this out there. Everybody talks about like Golden State. Hey, you got like two of the best shooters of all time. Clay may not, like, he's obviously, he just needs somebody that can just get him the ball because he's not going to be as mobile and he can just stand there and hit easy threes. There are teams where he can fit. I just don't see the fit.
Yeah, no, and fit is important because the way we've constructed our roster and the way we've drafted is definitely with a specific goal in mind, and that would be a complete pivot from what we're doing and just go in a completely different direction. And you're right. I do think there is a world where, I mean, he's an all NBA level player. He's an all defensive level talent. The people who kind of shit on him just because he that one play is what is stuck in everybody's mind. And I watched Matisse Thybulle on JJ Redick's podcast, and Matisse is like, it's crazy. He's like, I'm the one that missed the shot, but Ben Simmons is getting all the hate. Like, I understand he was right under the basket, but like, we've seen players crumble in big pressure situations on many occasions. Like, just think about a guy like in baseball. How many, like, getting the yips, or like somebody like Rick Ankiel who could no longer throw the ball over the plate. Like, this shit happens. And he got a lot of, I get it. Like, he gets paid a lot of money. People think that, you should be able to overcome anything regardless just because of that money that you make. But that's not reality. So he's getting a lot of hate, but like, he has handled it poorly recently. But I do think, trying to put myself in that situation, if I were in his shoes and I had Embiid, right after that the playoff series, talking about how, some people just aren't meant for, I can't remember how he worded it, but basically saying like some people just aren't meant to be able to handle these situations. Like, it would be hard. Like, think of us going to work and you have somebody who's like shitting on you the entire time. Like, are you going to want to go in?
Yeah. And Philly isn't the place to struggle.
Mm-mm.
No, that's a fair point. And I don't think there's any, I don't know, there's still people out there who doubt his maybe talent. I mean, he's still a pretty terrific player. But yeah, I mean, I do think, though, despite all of that, he has handled it pretty badly. Like,
if he were just a slightly below average shooter, he is like Giannis level.
Yeah.
Like, it's like he doesn't even try to shoot. He doesn't even want to dunk anymore. It's gotten really bad. Now, he like layups or dunks he can't even do, and he can get to the rim pretty easily. Playoffs, he gets exposed. Like, they'll just wall up. That's a problem because.
But you know what? There are ways around that walling up. I mean, that's what they used to do to Giannis, right? And you just have to scheme around it. You have to make it so that that defensively you can't have three men across the lane parked there. You need movement. You need shooters. Like, Philly is probably the worst constructed roster. He cannot play on a team where he has a big like Embiid. It just doesn't work because he essentially needs to fill that Embiid role.
Yep. And and it's gotten in his head too. Like, this whole, like, he has the yips, and it's just gone.
So do you guys think he's a perfect change of scenery candidate?
Oh yeah, I think absolutely he is. And
he's got to be.
He can do so much. I mean, defense, passing, rebounding, steals. Teams can put up walls against him, but he's a wall by himself. Like, he can go. So at this point, like, I think that it's like, obviously he's been unprofessional in certain ways, but I mean, Philly isn't innocent in this, and they're letting it go on. I think Daryl Morey really believes that he can get Bradley Beal or Dame Lillard for him. And
I don't think Lillard's happening. I don't see how that works for Portland.
I don't see how that works either. I think that if it's just return, I mean, not that this would happen. Like, they could call OKC, and OKC can just give them a dump truck full of first-round picks for them. Like Philly doesn't have the asset base to. Because if Portland trades Lillard, they're making the decision to rebuild.
Right.
Like, there's no other way around it. So you get Simmons, and then you're gonna have to eventually.
But again, what are you doing with Simmons if you're taking a step back by trading Lillard, right? I mean, it's like I think Simmons is probably a better fit for a contending team right now. That he can probably fill a hole or address a gap that they have, rather than him being a guy on a rebuilding team.
But then does the contending team want to deal with like fixing the shot? Like, it could.
I think a contending team might probably be open to it because, I mean, let's say if you have good offense, you may not need him for that, but he can still give you a whole lot of other stuff, right?
But it could risk disrupting the offense too. Like if the shooting issues don't, because then in the playoffs, if they know he can't shoot, then you could really, if Charles Barkley likes to say, it becomes 4-on-5. It just disrupts everybody else's rhythm. Because if they know he's not going to shoot, they're just going to cheat on the other guys.
One of the interesting ones that I heard, actually, there's a couple of them. One is the Clippers, and I heard about this. Like, I don't think it was actually a serious rumor. It might have been Hollinger just kind of like throwing out places where he could potentially go. Like, it would actually be interesting if he ended up on the Clippers. I think the only issue is you'd have to cobble together, because of the size of his contract. You'd have to cobble together a bunch of contracts to get him there. But it would be interesting to see him with PG and then eventually with Kawhi. I don't know if that ends up working long term, but
yeah, that would have to be a deal where they either bring in other teams or it's done in the off season, because there would be you have to move too many guys off your roster, and then you fall into the trap of how do you fill that roster? I mean, you're not even gonna have Kawhi for who knows how long. So
it was like 5 guys that they had to cobble together to make up the money. And you're right. And this was early preseason, so that like at that time it made sense because you can do it, and you can get guys to fill, like, you would essentially have to use your all your exceptions to be able to bring guys in, and then you'd have guys at minimum contracts. The other interesting one was the T-Wolves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that would be Cat would be a good guy to play with, because he can play a more perimeter based game than Embiid can. There's the contract of DAngelo Russell, which, I mean, there's the question of, do the Sixers want DAngelo Russell? But I think it's going to get to the point it's going to come to the point where Morey has to decide, am I actually going to get what I need? Because I know somebody else threw out Portland, but it wasn't Lillard, it was McCollum. And does that move the needle for the Sixers? I think McCollum would actually be a very interesting fit in Philly. If you have McCollum, Tobias Harris, and Embiid, McCollum will give you shooting. But I think Morey is so set on, those specific big names that he's gonna drag this out.
Yeah, and he doesn't care because he's a cold-blooded analytics guy.
Yeah.
And that's almost like we saw this to the detriment of, at times, Houston, where they couldn't get over the top because they were just like I think we're learning, like to go on a tangent, how when they couldn't hit threes in that Golden State series in that Game 7, like making that adjustment, like you see certain star level players shoot mid range, even if it's not a popular shot. They shoot the mid range and they get good at it because teams, especially in the playoffs, are taking away the three or are trying to keep them from getting to the rim. So they're trying to force them into mid-range situations. So the elite players, LeBron, Kawhi, and Paul George, and Giannis is starting to, these guys can hit the mid-range. They don't necessarily want to. Like, they prefer to hit a three or get to the rim, but they have learned that they have to be able to do that proficiently.
Yeah, because it's still that inefficiency, right? Like, yes, it's the lowest value shot. I mean, it's not as valuable. Like, it's not as a high percentage as the paint, or, it's not as valuable as behind the arc, but it does give you a lot of space, right, in playoffs. If
But Houston stubbornly just would not do it. They will, other than like I think Paul got to occasionally that a couple years he was there. I think Westbrook was allowed to, but they just will not like accept doing that because no matter what, like, I don't think that they ever get into like the basketball nuances that analytics doesn't always capture. Like they were,
you know what?
I think the whole that's the thing about like when you look at it from that standpoint, analytics will always help you put a brilliant team together over a course of a season because it evens out. When it comes to playoffs in a lot of sports, and basketball is probably one of the extremes where playoffs is pretty much a very different game altogether in a lot of ways because you're not giving out as many minutes to a lot of fringe players. Your main guys are playing 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and that makes a big difference. And those are the people who can probably create a lot of open space for themselves.
I'm glad we went off on this tangent because analytics was actually like, and especially analytics in basketball, since we've done it in our some of our baseball chats, it's somewhere I wanted to get to eventually, and I was trying to figure out the way to steer the conversation into that direction because like this whole notion of analytics, ruining the game and essentially saying it's either a 3-pointer or something at the basket, like that's it's a common misconception. And like I was listening to, so for anybody watching or listening, and even you guys, the Thinking Basketball podcast by Ben Taylor is a fantastic podcast. He has a few episodes where he talks specifically about these things and the use of analytics in basketball, and he's essentially said, and this is like the whole thing behind it is it's not 3-pointer or at the basket and mid-range is completely dead. It's don't take that shot that's one step inside of the 3-point line, step back, because that 1 foot is going to give you what is it, like 50% more value on the shot. So even if you're hitting 37% of your threes, it's still better than hitting 40% of your twos. And a lot of guys will shoot mid 40s, I think is around no, that not even mid 40s, but mid 40s
from 3 would get you 102 shots to take 100 shots. You need to get over 50%,
51% almost to better that.
Yeah, so that's what it is. And I think teams have figured that out and then everybody does it, but elite team, like you get into the nuances and like matchups and things like that. And I mean, going back to Houston, I think where Houston fell short is that I just don't think they were built to adapt and match up well. Like they just stuck. Like they were very stubborn in how they approach things. And even after they lost Game 7, Mike D'Antoni, they're good shots. We're just gonna take them. And like, yeah, that's true because it also like one thing that I was listening to Draymond and Kevin Durant on Kevin Durant's podcast, and they say the worst thing you could do is not get your shot up. Get the shot up. Don't disrupt your rhythm, so you can at least get back on D. So be consistent. Like do that. So, but I mean, it's just if you can, teams are going to want you to do things in the playoffs that you don't necessarily want to do. If you could figure out a way to do those effectively, you win.
But and that's matchups. Is that something where, again, going to the point, absolutely 3-point, like if you take a step back and you go behind and
my battery is running low,
you much more value. But if you're getting against someone, teams are defending against that, or teams are trying to stop you from getting near the basket. If you come across a player, it's like, if I can exploit this person right here, yes, it's a low value shot, but it's a better opportunity for me because sometimes I have someone out of position on D. If I can exploit that, I can still make my shot, right?
Yeah, and that's where like, and that's why like in the playoffs, like it becomes that chess game, that back and forth of I'm going to stop you, and that's what a good coach really does. It's like I've listened to a lot of coaching podcasts where it like the better coaches are the ones who don't have a rigid scheme that they just play all season. It's okay, I know what this player's tendencies are, and I'm going to stop the player from being able to get to that spot. So in response, the other team has to then adjust and try to figure out how else can we get him to that spot. It's adjusting to the adjustment, right? And that's like, yeah, it's like that's a big part of the game. And then sometimes that, like you saw with Phoenix throughout the playoffs, it was the mid-range. The mid-range was there because of how they were playing. Like you sometimes you just got to, and I think Kevin Durant has said this many times, like you can't have a computer or like analytics tell you how to play the game. Like, and yeah, sometimes it's absolutely feel. And the thing with some of these guys are like Chris Paul, while he may not be, I think he's actually close to 50% in the mid-range. And some of these guys that are at an elite level are close to like that 50% or just over that 50% mark. So like it's actually worth it to take that shot for them because you're almost getting as much value as if you're shooting that three.
Yeah, for sure.
And especially if you're a lesser player shooting the three. But the other thing is that I remember last year I posted something on Twitter where it was a video of early 2000s offensive sets compared to like 2008 compared to 2015 compared to now, and you see the spacing that is created. Like early 2000 was everybody compacted in like the middle of the key, and then you just see like the slow movement out, and it opens up like that entire mid-range area. So you got to take it if it's there.
Yep.
But the thing that I found, and the reason I wanted to get into this discussion, I got into a little bit of a back and forth with somebody about Kobe Bryant, and like I can't remember who they were comparing, but I said like essentially, oh, he was saying, oh, Kobe Bryant's top 5, and this is one of those debates that always happens on social media, Kobe Bryant being top 5, and I said, you can sure you can say that, but then you're like, what about Bill Russell? What about like Magic? What about like there's so many other players who I would put ahead of Kobe Bryant. And then I brought up analytics and data to support that argument. But sometimes I feel like, and I don't know if you guys go through this with baseball, and actually I've mentioned it about baseball, that's kind of one of the things that turned me off. But how do you work analytics into an argument without actually sounding pretentious and like you're one of those like nerdy, like, oh, okay, data guys? Is there a way to do it? Like,
I think it's probably. I think it probably starts out like, instead of trying to just spew all those numbers all the time, which again we're all guilty of from time to time. I think it's important to understand what purpose does analytics serve, and it's pretty much the same thing as having more information and you're trying to exploit inefficiencies or trying to first take advantage of low-hanging fruits, and then you're trying to find different ways to get better, right? So I mean, in baseball terms, for example, not many people know. I think that technically, I am forgetting the name, but the first sabermetrician ever was a Canadian guy who was hired by, what was the Dodgers? Who was the famous Dodgers GM who signed Jackie Robinson?
Branch Rickey.
Branch Rickey was the first guy who hired this Canadian to keep tabs on splits. So lefties against righties and righties against lefties. From if you go back and look at games from that era, that's advanced analytics, right? I mean, he was trying to figure out, okay, there are certain players who do better against the others, then why wouldn't I exploit that? Similarly, Jackie Robinson was in an efficiency. There's a whole bunch of talent in the Negro leagues that is untapped, and they bring speed, which isn't it's not big in Major League Baseball today. So in addition to all the social stuff, I mean, there's a lot of other reasons as well, right? So analytics is there to exploit or just provide you with that more efficiency. That's why a lot of people will say, like, I was on a Twitter space once and people were talking about cricket analytics, and they say, hey, but if you still follow analytics, your data gets biased after a while because you still follow. But I'm like, that's where analytics is dynamic, just like anything else. Once your data becomes biased towards one thing, someone else will come and find the inefficiency on the other side. That's why on-base percentage was a big deal like 20 years ago. But if anyone starts off a conversation about on-base percentage today, it's laughable, right? Like, You're not going to set up an analytics group with that conversation. There's a whole lot of other stuff. And now we're starting to see that with the StatCast era, everyone, like, baseball became a lot of like 3-2 outcome sport, right? Walks, home runs, and strikeouts. And now you're starting to see some teams are probably trying to shift away from that and trying to value contact a little bit more. At the expense of power. So there's some things like Pittsburgh was interesting when they were selling everything like crazy, but some of the players they got in return, you can see there's some interesting profiles there. They're looking for something different. You don't know how. So yes, your data gets biased because everyone goes towards that, but then someone finds a way to exploit that down the road, and that's how it keeps shifting. And that's always been the case with everything, right? And like football, like for example, forget analytics. You have like a couple of plays, sometimes they get popular, people keep, one team does it, 2 3, like wildcat, for example, right? It, like, suddenly it catches on, and then a lot of teams do it, you find a way, and then someone else finds a way to exploit that, and then, like, people constantly adjust. A lot of times that's why teams try to mirror what recent champions have done, because it's like, and then someone finds a different way. So I think it's always been around. It's just the word analytics somehow creates that, that pushback, but in some way, shape, or form, it's always been there. Has always been there.
I feel like it's more accepted in baseball circles when you're talking baseball than it is in basketball. In basketball, it's automatically like, oh, you don't watch the game, you just look at numbers.
Baseball is ultimately, even though it's a team game, every event is one-on-one, pitcher versus batter, defender by himself. So it's easier to quantify and use that information. Basketball, it's what a player does in many cases dependent on what everybody else is doing. So there's so many moving parts, and you can't always quantify, oh, this guy took a bad shot. Well, I took that bad shot because 4 other guys are out of position, and that was the only shot we had. Or we took the bad shot because I don't trust these 2 other guys to do it, and the defensive, like, the scheme set me up to do that, but I've been working on that. Like, there's just so much more nuanced, right? But
so this is interesting. Sorry, but this is something I've learned a lot from watching soccer, because I think teams have found a way to quantify that a lot better. It's just that probably a lot of it is proprietary data. We don't see that.
Yeah.
You still see a lot of that in soccer, which is why I think so that is why there's small things, right? So I mean, old school people have always talked about, especially if you listen to these hockey experts, it's like playing without the puck, right? So same thing in basketball or soccer. How do you play when you don't have the ball? And yeah, you're right, Pranav. That's the piece that's hard to quantify, right? But I think teams are starting to catch on to that, because they're very subtle things. And the problem is that the fans don't realize that. A lot of people look for scoring. A lot of people look for assists and, like, those raw numbers, right? And it's hard to figure that out. But in soccer, especially when you break down a play and you say, you're facing a defender and you don't have the ball, but all you do is you probably just pivot a little bit. That one body position somehow changes the game entirely. Especially, let's say, if you are a defender and your body position, just the way you set yourself up, it forces the team to go into a different area, let's say, than they would have intended to or they would have wanted to. Like, these little things that, it's, in all honesty, it's hard for fans to pick up. It's not because people are stupid. It's because on TV there's a whole lot going on. Sometimes you won't even see what's going on at the other end, and you move your body, and sometimes if you're defending, do you stay close to the body or do you want to stay back because you don't want someone that space to turn around? Like, there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on there, right? Like, it's different when you're defending, let's say, someone like Lukaku, who's a big, strong-bodied guy. But if you look at a 9 for Liverpool, like Firmino, who's not the primary goal scorer, his role is a little bit different. So for him, like, those positioning is important because he's the link up between defense and offense, and how the wingers would more or less, or the wideouts would score. So, and that's something, it's very hard to pick up. Like, even like I wouldn't pick up a lot of these things, and I watch like 4 soccer games a week, right? Like, but I can pick up on all these nuances all the time.
Yeah, and I remember reading Ben Falk, who is the creator of Cleaning the Glass, has a little article on the website about how to watch basketball. and he was talking about like one instance where he was with, I don't know if it was with the Blazers. I think it might have been with the Blazers, like early on in his career, where he was watching film, and I can't remember who the coach was at the time, but they're watching video, and it was a bad shot taken by the player, and this kind of goes back to what we were saying about a bunch of like four guys who were kind of just standing around, didn't create anything. So it was a bad shot, and he just said, "Oh, like that was a terrible shot." But what he didn't see was, and what the coach brought up was, he's like, that one there was a cut, and the player cut almost walking, like just jogging through it, and the coach pointed out that one cut ruined the entire play because it wasn't believable to the defense, so they didn't have to respect it and forced the other player into a bad shot. And that's the kind of stuff that like it's hard to quantify. And sometimes when you get into those analytics discussions, it's like that's when somebody comes up with, well, I mean, you don't really watch the game, you're just looking at numbers. But I mean, like I find it interesting now, some of the applications where it's like you see the movement of players being worked into it. And I remember like 15 years ago, I heard Butch Carter on the Fan 590, like I think it was with Norm Rumack, talking about gravity and the gravity of a player, and basically talking about like how he attracts attention. I remember listening to it. I'm like, this guy's nuts. He's talking about gravity. He's talking about stuff that like I didn't understand, and I bet you like most of the people at the time didn't understand because it was such a new concept, and this was like years after he had finished coaching. But it was still a relatively new concept in non front office circles, which like it leads me to think like, what do they have access to? Because I would love to see the level of data that a front office in basketball has access to with like position tracking and just like I've seen models that are built on like a player's position on the court with the ball, how the value of the shot that he creates goes up depending on the position. And it's just, there's some cool stuff that people do with just like the publicly available data. So just imagine what they could do, what front offices have.
Yeah, again, and same on one of those Twitter spaces, this guy who's a head of strategy for a professional cricket team, and he says, like the stuff that we have access to doesn't even exist publicly, right? And he's like, the one example he gave is something it's called true runs. And he's like, we know that if it's an over number 14 at this ground at this time of the day, the average run, so teams might say he's given up 8 runs and it's not a good over. We know what the true value of that over is at that point. It's like, it's just insane. And that is for a sport that where analytics is probably picked up a lot later than even basketball, for example, or soccer. So I would venture to think even those non-ball handling skills, teams have found a way to quantify those, especially the way you're starting to see when they value some of the players. Like, why are you paying so much? I mean, someone went down enough, like Barcelona shelling out 160 for Coutinho, but other than that,
Barcelona, I can guarantee you, does not use analytics. They think with their pocketbook and just the shininess of a player.
Well, they use the analytics to maximize
put him in there, give him the ball.
Well, I think where analytics has taken teams have become obsessed with value rather than just putting a good team, entertaining product on the field or on the court or whatever. It's always about maximizing. Like, I think in baseball, what ended up happening was like with launch angle and all that, we discovered that home runs are more valuable, so just get home runs. Whether you make an out with contact or without contact, that doesn't matter. Cheat for the home runs. Get the strikeouts because it's the most value you can get. And then it goes further where, the baseball free agency, we can get value out of inexpensive younger players, but we're not going to spend money in free agency and keep salaries flat. So just all about maximizing value. And that's where it's gone from exploiting inefficiencies to help your team to maximizing value over having the game be aesthetically pleasing or entertaining or more nuanced.
100%.
Yeah. And that's a tough balance, right? I'm sure that's not easy for a general manager or a coach to balance the business side of things with the on-field or on-court side.
But then it comes back to, like, see, the challenge is baseball is aesthetically less pleasing than it was maybe 10 years ago. Like, I 100% agree. And even in basketball, okay, we know the value, how mid shot is, like the jump, like it's not as valuable as a 3 or So we know all of that, but there was still fun watching the game evolve that way, right? It's kind of different now than it was 15 years ago, and some people don't like it. I think that's where the onus is on the league to tinker with the rules. I think some leagues are very slow to react, and that's one thing I always give football credit is they change rules every year. It's hard to keep up sometimes, but at least you're reacting to what teams are doing and or reacting to the reality of your times.
Yeah, I mean, I'm as long as the rule tinkering is within reason, then I'm all for it. I don't know, like in the NBA, like I know they've been talking about like if people have thrown out the idea of a 4-point shot or something like that. Like I don't know if I'm crazy about stuff. Yeah. I think that just shifts you even more in that other direction, which I don't see the NBA ever doing that. But yeah, I think they're like even with what you saw like early 2000s with hand checking and not being able to have ride a player with your hand while you're covering them. Like I like small things like that. Or now with not being able to jump into a defender when he's going up to block a shot, which I don't know how the hell it took them so long to change that rule. Like James Harden was doing it for like how many years before they said, wait, hold on. To me, it always looked like an offensive foul. How the hell are you not calling it an offensive foul? I don't know. So anyways, I mean, we've been, I didn't think we'd go this long. I thought we were going to have a short.
Yes.
So we've been rambling for 56 minutes about, waxing on the philosophies of basketball, which I actually love. It's something about it, like just talking about how the game has evolved and like the things behind it. Something fun about it, but I think this is a good spot to end it off. So again, the Raptors are going to be playing Friday against Boston. I'm calling for a win on that, just because I like to think positively. Predictions, Azam, Pramit?
I think they'll lose against Boston, but they'll beat Dallas.
I'd say lose both.
Ooh.
I actually wanted to say that, but I wanted to be positive. So you're probably right. All right, so that's a good spot to end it off. If you're still watching, that one viewer who made it through, it might be my fiance. I don't know. Thank you very much for watching. If you're watching post recording, thank you very much. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. Hit the like button, which really helps us out. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram. I mean, we post less on Instagram now. It's mostly Twitter. But feel free to follow us and just let us know if there's anything you want to see here, or if you're willing to come on as a guest and you know a little bit something about baseball or basketball, just let us know and hit us up and we can work something out. But have a good night and thanks again for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.